Hello, my name is Brian Thackeray, and welcome to my crazy ramblings. Today I want to talk about something that dawned on me a little while back, but I think is something important that everyone at least thinks about, even if you don't agree with what I'm saying. And that is, if you've read the thumbnail, or the title of the video, that Santa Claus is as real as the U.S. government. Now, I want to start with a disclaimer. As you can see, I have the Constitution behind me. I have Captain America. I love America. I love the government that we have. But government in and of itself is nothing more than a social construct, which means that it's imaginary. It's not real. Now, when I tell people this, their first thing that they usually go to is, of course it's real. Who's pulling me over then? Who's making laws? And my response is always that it's people. And that's why I try to use the analogy of Santa Claus. Because Santa Claus only exists because we make him. The collective idea of Santa would not exist if presents didn't appear under people's trees on Christmas. On the same vein, government wouldn't exist if money doesn't have value, if roads don't work, if law enforcement doesn't do their job, and things like that. We don't have the social nets that we all pay into and are promised. One thing I wanted to go into, I actually have a note about this. We as human beings are great at making things that are not real. Going on this, and this is a little bit of a tangent, but I'll bring it up because I think it's a little bit applicable. The dollar at this time is also imaginary. Up until I think it was the 60s, let me actually look that up, 1973. Up until 1973, every time you had a dollar, it represented a specific weight of gold. But at a certain point, we as a government said that the dollar is worth what we say. The problem is that now there's no physical representation of what a dollar is. It's basically just based off of the trust the world has in the dollar. And now I've already kind of touched on this earlier, but the reason why governments exist as well as like Santa Claus is because of the promise of reward. The benefits we get for buying into this idea of government, that if we pay our taxes and we're a good citizen and we do our part to say the government exists, then we get a certain amount of benefit from it. We get a strong military, a strong navy. We get roads. Ideally, if we don't mess it up, we'd get Social Security, so social safety nets if things go bad. We all only continue to follow those things as long as those rewards are dangled in front of us. And when they stop being so, that's when you start to see political unrest. And we saw that a little bit January 6th. We saw it during the riots of 2020, or peaceful protests with just a little bit of fire. And even with the development of that small little place in Seattle called Chaz, where they said that they are no longer under the rule of the government and they set up their own autonomous zone that is no longer subject to any ruler. It didn't work out for them because the benefits of buying into that social construct were nearly non-existent. They didn't have agriculture to support themselves. They didn't have utilities. They didn't have ability to take away trash, do all of that. And so it quickly fell apart because there were no social benefits to it. The third point I want to make is that another reason why people say that government does exist is because you can look out and see the law enforcement and military and whatnot. Counter argument to that is that every December you can see Santa Claus in every mall across America. Doesn't mean that Santa Claus is real, just because you see police officers doesn't mean that the government is real. Police officers, law enforcement are nothing more than people who are enforcing this social construct that everyone's bought into. And we see this happen from time to time when the police force no longer believes in the social construct, that's when corruption can easily take place, and then everyone's out for number one. Which brings me into the reason why I bring all of this up in the first place. I believe that there are people who don't believe in the social construct of government. So they use it to further their own goals. I think it happens in all forms of government, whether it's local, federal, whatnot. I say this as someone who participates in government. I am on my city's planning and zoning board. And there are a couple things in it that really make me feel feelings, we'll say it that way. I think something like 3 or 4 people on the city planning and zoning board are all real estate agents, which is a little interesting because zoning, for those of you who don't know, that's where you have no real power to make anything. All of its recommendations you send to the elected officials, which would be the city council. But 9 times out of 10, the planning and zoning is appointed by the city council or the mayor. And so once it's been rubber stamped by planning and zoning, it's nearly always rubber stamped by the city council. I have rarely seen city council reject an offer that we made. But like I was saying, is that several of the people on the board are real estate agents, which is interesting because the changing of zones directly impacts the price of property. If you know what land is changing hands and what zones it's becoming, you have a leg up against your competition. Now, to be fair, all of our zones are public. Everyone has access to them. So if people really wanted to know, they could just show up and listen. But it's interesting to me. Another thing that's also very interesting, if you look at your city council, a lot of the time, people who own the largest businesses in the town are also the ones that are in the city council. Now, are they invested in the city's growth because they have a large business, or are they trying to change the city to make it more profitable for their business? It's hard to say, because if you're pushing to grow a city and you sell a local commodity, as you have more people to sell to, you'll make more money. But likewise, could you just really love your community and want to see it grow, and in turn, that causes your business to elevate? It's hard to know the intentions of a person. Why am I bringing all of this up? The reason I am talking about this, especially at this time of year, is that I think that people, especially common rank and file, have this idea that the government is this enigma that exists in everyday life that we have no control over. I don't think that. And the reason being is that I don't know how many of you listening are parents or have listened to how your parents handle this. Different parents handle the belief of Santa Claus differently, which is fascinating. Everyone kind of uses it the same. You got to be good or you won't get presents. You go to bed on time, this, that, and the other. And it's usually a means of controlling people who are not in the know. Basically, what I'm saying is that you need to be in the know to know that the government is only as powerful as we allow it to be. But that it means a collective we, not just like you and me. It means everyone. If there's enough people with the things behind me to enforce a certain rule of law, it is unstoppable. But I don't think we're at that point in our country. I think that there are enough people with a shared goal of what we want this country to be that we can still make this work. But you can't at any point give up and think that the government is out of your control. Because as soon as you do that, you are fundamentally relinquishing any power that you might have. I think my final point that I'm trying to make is that I don't really have a point. It's more of I just want people to be aware that the government is nothing more than an idea that is used to propagate societal rule. And if you are not involved in that decision-making process, at least at the very least, you need to vote. At most, get involved locally. Show up to city council. All city council meetings and public zone meetings are open to the public. And if you're not paying attention, you can end up somewhere that you really don't agree with. And I will tell you, having been to planning and zoning, having been to city council meetings, a loud group of people have massive sway because 9 times out of 10, people who are making rules, they're living their own life. They are having stuff put in front of them. Ideally, they've read through it. They know everything it says, but a lot of times they don't. And they'll have it explained in a way that they're like, oh, yeah, that sounds good. I don't see any ramifications for that. And unless someone says otherwise, it just goes through. We need to be the people that keep the government in check, because the government only becomes something that has complete control over us when it becomes something like Santa Claus. We need to make sure that we're not the children that are being told that, hey, you need to make sure that you leave out your milk and cookies, you go to bed on time, and you follow all my rules, or he won't give you presents. You need to be like, no, I will leave out the milk and cookies as long as I get XYZ and that I'm getting something out of this deal, because a lump of coal isn't good enough. Anyways, these have been my crazy ramblings. I don't know what I'm trying to say, but be involved. If you like what I say and you want to hear more of my craziness, like, comment, subscribe. I'd really like to know what you think about it, because I've received some very interesting reactions to this belief. Everything from you're crazy to, oh, I can kind of see where you're coming from. But thank you so much for taking your time to watching me, and I will see you around.